Ragnarok Rising, the Draugr's Curse. Chapter 1. Ragnar, the Scout. Cold winds howled across the rocky cliffs like the screams of lost spirits, but Ragnar paid them no mind. The young Viking pulled his furs tighter and trekked onward, following the faint trail only his keen eyes could discern. Where others saw only bleak wilderness, Ragnar found adventure. Ever since he was a child, Ragnar had felt the call of the unknown. He was lanky and lean, built for ranging ahead of hunting parties, not for grappling in the shield wall. Ragnar explored every hidden valley and foggy fjord he could find, sometimes gone for days. He'd return with tales of new lands and discoveries that made him an oddity among his people. They shook their heads, dismissing Ragnar as useless for proper rating. But something stirred in the wind today that spelt ill fortune. Ragnar had been tracking a small herd of elk when he came across the corpses. Their bodies were drained and ravaged in unnatural ways. No predator Ragnar knew of killed like that. His heart told him darkness had awakened somewhere in these lands. As the shadows grew long, Ragnar hurried back to the Viking camp with growing dread. He hoped the raiding party had not stumbled upon some ancient evil in a faraway land. But as he crested a rise overlooking the settlement, his breath caught at the sight of figures lurching about chaotically. The living dead had risen to plague the Vikings. Ragnar alone had returned to witness the horror creeping upon his people. Ragnar crept silently towards the Viking settlement, crouching behind a tangled hawthorn bush. The camp was in chaos, with unnatural figures staggering about. Their gait was halting, limbs twitching. Ragged snarls drifted on the wind. These were not men, but creatures possessed of some dark magic. Peering closer, Ragnar spotted familiar faces now distended by rigor mortis. His heart sank as he recognized Jorn, a burly raider who loved testing his strength against young recruits. But no breath stirred Jorn's chest now, only a predator's hunger as he lunged at fleeing people. Other zombie Vikings swarmed over the camp, spreading their plague. The living defenders swung axes and swords with little effect. Blades only slowed the zombies, not granting the true death. Cursed sorcery strengthened the undead. Ragnar watched with despair. Just 2 days prior, Jorn and 30 others had set sail to raid a cluster of villages rumored to be wealthy but strange. Ragnar had begged to go along as scout, hungry for new horizons. But the raiders mocked his slender size, denying him a place. How different matters could have been if Ragnar had been allowed to follow the signs and portents he read like runes. There would be time later for regrets. Ragnar slowly retreated from the ridge, circling wide around the still-growing mass of zombies. He had to leave immediately to find answers before the Viking settlement was lost utterly. This cursed evil could spread like a plague through the lands if not stopped quickly. Ragnar's mind turned to old songs of walking dead and dark magics. There were whispers of such things in the far northern wastes. He would begin his search there among the lonely glacial valleys. Perhaps some elder with forgotten knowledge could show Ragnar how to break these zombies' hold on his people before it was too late. The cold wind sang a mournful song as Ragnar stole one last look at his now doomed home. Jaw clenched with determination, the scout embarked on his desperate quest, the camp's screams chasing him into the night. Chapter 2. The Lonely Road. The vast emptiness of the open tundra stretched on endlessly before Ragnar as he trekked northward alone. The icy wind howled like a beast in pain, cutting through furs and flesh to freeze the very bone. He pulled his cloak tighter, eyes watering against the gale. Days had passed since Ragnar fled the cursed Viking settlement. A hellish vision of the walking dead feasting on his kinsmen seared into his mind. He shook his head angrily. If only they had heeded his warnings. Something unnatural was afoot, instead of dismissing him as a useless daydreamer. Now, the people paid a grim price for their ignorance. Ragnar's path took him ever farther from the scattered domains of men. The frosted plains gave way to jagged ridges cloaked in snow, towering peaks looming beyond, like the spears of ice giants. Few ventured to these remote and unsparing lands, but Ragnar took comfort in the solitude of the wilderness. Out here, the only enemy was nature itself, not the supernatural evil that had shattered his world. As Ragnar climbed into the mist-shrouded mountains, the air grew even more still and frigid. Loose rocks slid treacherously underfoot. He relied on his scout's instincts to find safe passage through the hazardous terrain. Ragnar's ultimate destination was a hidden valley deep in the far north. According to legend, strange wise men older than memory dwelled there. He prayed they could help him save his people. Camping in a sheltered rocky overhang, Ragnar kept a small fire burning through the endless night. The dancing flames held back the darkness as howls echoed in the distance. Ragnar stood a vigilant guard, axe poised, for what may come stalking out of the gloom. Soon he would reach journey's end, but surviving the wilderness could prove the easiest part of his quest. The true test still lay ahead. When dawn's light crept over the mountains, Ragnar stomped out the embers and continued his tireless march. The wind picked up again, seeming to resist his progress. But he was close now. Around a bend, Ragnar spotted the opening to a snow-drifted valley. Oddly shaped stones guarded the entrance like a row of troll sentinels. This was the place, the domain of those who would have wisdom to defeat the zombie plague if the old tales held true. Gripping his axe, Ragnar stepped between the ancient monoliths. An eerie silence greeted him. No birds sang, no animals stirred amidst the rocky crags. Ragnar followed a winding path downwards, snow crunching under his boots. As he descended, the temperature grew warmer, patches of green lichen dotting the valley walls. Ragnar came to a halt when the path opened up, beholding a small settlement of thatched stone huts. Could this be the sanctuary he sought? "Turn back, wayfarer," a stern voice called out, echoing off the valley walls. An elder man with a long gray beard emerged from a hut, leaning heavily on a carved staff. His piercing eyes fixed on Ragnar. "Your kind is not welcome here." Ragnar held his hands out, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Please, wise one, I seek your counsel to stop a great evil, a plague of the walking dead." The elder's eyes narrowed sharply. "The Draugr? We warned your people long ago not to disturb that cursed tomb." He sighed heavily. "Come, we have much to discuss." Over a simple meal, Ragnar recounted his tale as the elder listened intently, his deeply lined face growing ever more grave. Finally, Ragnar finished, pleading for aid against the undead horde. The elder sat in silence for several moments before responding. "You were right to come here. We know magic and rituals, forgotten by the wider world. I cannot promise your people can be saved, but we shall give you the means to combat the Draugr." Ragnar's heart swelled with hope for the first time since the nightmare began. Perhaps there was a chance after all. Chapter 3: Dark Rituals. Ragnar sat cross-legged inside the elder's stone hut as frigid wind howled outside. A small fire flickered, casting dancing shadows over arcane objects lining the walls. The smells of exotic herbs and smoldering incense filled the room. The elder, whose name was Eyvind, slowly poured a cup of murky liquid and offered it to Ragnar. Drink this tonic. It shall protect you from the curse. Ragnar swallowed the bitter concoction without hesitation. Ivan nodded in approval. Now, heed closely, for the ritual I grant you must be followed exactly. The old man pulled an ancient scroll from his robes. This incantation shall shield your mind from the Draugr and allow you to control them for a time. But it requires a sacrifice. Ragnar clenched his fist. My life for my people. Tell me what I must do. Ivan unrolled the scroll, revealing strange symbols and patterns. At the height of midnight, under clear skies, you must burn this parchment soaked with blood from your hand. The smoke shall carry the spell. When you breathe it, the Draugr shall sense you as their master. Reaching towards the fire, Ivan pressed the tip of his staff into the embers. The end glowed red hot. Present your hand. Ragnar gritted his teeth as the searing metal smoked against his skin. Ivan cut a shallow gash in Ragnar's palm, collecting the blood in a bowl to prepare the enchanted ritual. Now heed this warning, Ivan said gravely. The spell's protection will wane. If you do not complete your task before the sun rises again, the Draugr shall turn on you. Ragnar bid the elder farewell at first light, supplied with the ritual parchment. He looked back once at the valley that had been his brief refuge, before turning to face the deathly solitude of the mountains again. The freezing journey tested Ragnar's endurance to its very limits. Arriving haggard at the Viking camp days later, Ragnar was shocked to find it eerily abandoned. The settlement showed signs of a desperate battle against the undead horde, but no corpses remained, living or dead. Exhausted as he was, Ragnar had to push on immediately under cover of darkness to find the Draugr. He suspected where the cursed horde had shuffled off to a sprawling burial complex hidden nearby, filled with plundered tombs. With trembling hands, Ragnar prepared the ritual as midnight approached. The old magic would give him temporary command over the Draugr, but he feared what the coming dawn might bring. Chapter 4: Army of the Dead. The muted crunch of Ragnar's boots across the snow sounded deafening in the still silence surrounding the burial mound. A few torches flickered along the outer wall, abandoned by terrified guards. Ragnar steeled himself and slipped through the stone entryway. Immediately, the stench of decay assailed his nostrils. Shuffling shapes moved in the gloom ahead, the Draugr patrols. Ragnar unslung the satchel holding the prepared ritual parchment and steeled himself. He had to time this perfectly. At the precise stroke of midnight by his reckoning, Ragnar held the enchanted parchment over a torch. As the dry page ignited, Ragnar wafted the cursed smoke into his face, chanting the spell Ivan had taught him. The reaction was immediate. The Draugr in the passage jerked their heads towards Ragnar in unison, pupil-less eyes gleaming. He could feel the ritual working, their undead minds now linked to his own. Come, Ragnar commanded with as much authority as he could muster. The lead Draugr began marching towards him, the others falling in step behind. Ragnar led his new undead army deeper through a maze of crypts and tombs, seeking the inner sanctum chamber. More Draugr joined the procession until over 100 walked behind him. Ragnar could sense their hunger kept at bay only by his spell. Up ahead, ornate stone doors marked the burial vault of an ancient king, the focal point of the curse. With a deep breath, Ragnar pushed open the doors. A towering Draugr lord rose from its carved sarcophagus, eyes burning with pale blue fire. It sensed the intruder entering its domain. Ragnar raised his axe and let loose a primal yell as his army of the dead surged into the inner sanctum with him. The final battle against the zombie plague had begun. Ragnar fought through the night against the Draugr Lord and its summoned allies as his undead thralls clashed and fell apart around him. At times, the spell shielded Ragnar's mind, while at others, the connection seemed to waver. Ragnar could feel the ritual waning as dawn approached. With a final burst of determination, he charged forward and buried his axe deep into the Draugr Lord's chest. A deafening roar shook the crypt as blinding light erupted from the ancient king's remains. Then silence. Ragnar collapsed in exhaustion. Had he done it? Had the curse been lifted? He crawled forward and pushed open the stone doors, daylight spilling inside. The remaining Draugr crumbled to dust in the sun's rays. Ragnar laughed deliriously before the strength left his body. By Odin's name, he had broken the curse. Chapter 5, Aftermath. Ragnar blinked his eyes open slowly, wincing at the brightness that greeted him. He was lying on a straw mattress in a small hut, daylight streaming through an open window. How did he get here? Awake at last, my friend. Ragnar turned to see Eyvind sitting beside the bed, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. I found you passed out in the burial vaults, and brought you to recover here. Ragnar jolted upright. The Draugr, the curse, what happened? Eyvind placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Peace, you succeeded. The curse was lifted. Some survivors found their way back to the settlement. Ragnar absorbed this with relief and disbelief. By Odin's name, he had actually done it. The nightmare was over for good. Days passed as Ragnar regained his strength. He learned fragments of what occurred after the ritual. The surviving villagers, no longer hunted by zombies, had followed ancient trails back to their ancestral home. They found Ragnar alive within the crypts. The vanquished Draugr erupted into dust. Ragnar walked through the settlement, helping repair damage and bury the remaining dead. Though the people were grateful, he read the unease on many faces. They would never look at Ragnar the same way again after witnessing his power over the undead. As the Vikings held a great feast celebrating their salvation, Ragnar slipped away under the stars. He had saved his people, but the time had come to embark on a new journey, one he must make alone. The next morning, Eyvind found a note tucked within his doorway. Thank you for everything, my friend. My fate now leads me down a different path. Do not follow. Ragnar paused atop a ridge overlooking the village one last time. Though he had found purpose here for a time, the open road always called him home in the end. With a bittersweet smile, Ragnar turned and embarked toward new horizons. Chapter 6, The Lone Wanderer. The icy wind biting at his face, Ragnar trudged along a forgotten forest path, the snow-capped mountains at his back. Weeks had passed since he left the Viking village for a life on the road once more. Ragnar preferred the wild solitude now. After the shared horror of the Draugr curse, he felt a new divide from the settlers. They honored him as a hero, but also feared the powers he had tapped into. Ragnar could not blame them. He too felt changed in ways he did not fully understand. So he returned to the wilderness and wandering existence he knew best. Ragnar foraged for berries and trapped small game to survive. At night, he took shelter in caves tucked away from well-trod routes. He encountered few fellow travelers in these secluded lands. One frigid dusk, as Ragnar prepared to make camp, he heard a rough commotion on the path ahead. Creeping forward, he spotted a ransacked merchant wagon beset by 5 burly bandits. They yelled and cursed in a foreign tongue, rifles trained on a cowering elderly man. Ragnar's hand tightened on the haft of his axe. Once he would have slipped away unseen, but the old darkness rose within him now. The same rage that fueled him against the Draugr. Gripping his axe, Ragnar charged with a primal roar. The bandits scarcely had time to react before Ragnar was upon them, his axe striking in vicious blows, unrelenting as a winter tempest. Blood sprayed the white snow crimson. In mere moments, 5 bodies lay still around the wagon. Ragnar turned to the shaken merchant, reaching a hand out. But the old man cringed away in fear. "Monster," he cried out, making a warding sign against evil before fleeing into the woods. Ragnar stood alone amidst the aftermath. The violence had erupted from him reflexively, but the merchant's reaction stung deep. Had he become the very evil he once fought? Walking away down the lonely path, Ragnar grappled with his inner darkness. He had ended the zombie threat, but perhaps that was only the beginning of his reckoning. Sighing wearily, Ragnar steeled himself for the long road ahead. Chapter 7. Blood on the Snow. Ragnar sat staring into his campfire, the dancing flames offering little warmth from the coldness creeping into his heart. A week had passed since he saved the merchant from bandits, only to be called a monster in return. Ragnar had not wanted to kill those men, but in the heat of the moment, some primal instinct took over. The same instinct that allowed him to control the Draugr. Since that ritual, he felt changed. Shouts and snapping branches disrupted Ragnar's brooding. Bandits again, chasing a young woman through the woods nearby. Gripping his axe, Ragnar went to intervene. But he hesitated this time. Should he unleash that darkness? The woman's screams decided for him. Ragnar rushed into the trees, swinging his axe in a whirlwind of steel. The bandits, for this time, fell before him one by one. As the last collapsed in a bloody heap, Ragnar turned to the woman. "Flee from this place," he told her gently. She obeyed without a word. Ragnar stood alone among the bodies strewn across the snow. The violence came easier each time. He stared at his hands, slick with crimson. A single question haunted him. What am I becoming? Those words echoed in Ragnar's mind over the following days as he wandered. He avoided roads now, sticking to the deepest wilderness. Out here, he couldn't hurt anyone, but nor could he help them. Passing a small village, Ragnar spotted a young boy being harassed by bullies. He yearned to intervene, but stayed back, not trusting himself anymore. The darkness grew inexorably within. That night, Ragnar dreamt of the Draugr. The creatures surrounded him, caressing his shoulders almost fondly. "You are one of us now," they seemed to whisper. "The darkness will never let you go." Ragnar awoke with a start, breathing heavy. "Just dreams," he told himself, but looking at his hands, he imagined blood staining them once more. Chapter 8. Cleansing Fire. Ragnar sat staring into the campfire, watching the flames consume the dry wood. Fire purifies, he thought, cleanses and renews. But could it purge the darkness festering within his own tortured soul? Weeks had passed, wandering alone in self-imposed exile, shunning humanity for their own protection. But the bloody dreams of the Draugr came every night now, whispering to embrace his growing dark power. Ragnar feared he would soon lose this battle. In the village days ago, Ragnar had spotted a remote chapel in the woods. Abandoned and decrepit now, but perhaps still holy. As the last embers of Ragnar's fire died out, he set off by moonlight towards the chapel. He would make one final plea for salvation. Rotted wooden doors creaked open to Ragnar's shove, flakes of paint drifting down. The musky interior was illuminated only by thin shafts of moonlight piercing cracks in the walls. Kneeling before the weathered altar, Ragnar closed his eyes. "All-Father Odin, preserve me," he prayed desperately. "Grant me strength to overcome this shadow within." Only silence answered. But then, a whisper. faint words just at the edge of hearing. Ragnar strained to listen. If you cannot quell the darkness, then you must embrace it fully. Ragnar's eyes shot open. Hallucination? But no, a shadowy figure stood watching him from the rear of the chapel. Ragnar leapt up, axe raised warily. Who are you? Figure glided forward into a bar of moonlight, revealing a face both ancient and ageless. His skin was pale as snow, eyes pools of endless black. I am the Knight Incarnate, the stranger rasped, and I would make you my avenging angel. Ragnar's fingers whitened on his axe haft. I want no dark powers, only redemption. The pale stranger chuckled. Poor fool. You were already damned from the moment you drank Ivan's ritual potion. Ragnar's stomach dropped. Was this the truth underlying the changes in him? Had the Elder's aid carried a hidden cost? The pale stranger extended a clawed hand. Embrace your fate. I shall teach you to master the darkness, not be enslaved by it. Ragnar trembled, feeling forces collide within his soul. This was his final reckoning. With a scream of anguish, he made his choice and brought the axe down with all his might. Chapter 9, Temptation in the Dark. Wood chips flew as Ragnar's axe cleaved into the chapel altar, ancient, dried timber splitting under the force of his blow. He had made his choice to reject the pale stranger's temptation. Foolish boy, the dark figure hissed, gliding swiftly toward Ragnar with claws outstretched. Ragnar wrenched his axe free and swung wildly, but his blow passed straight through the apparition, throwing him off balance. Pale stranger waved a hand, casting Ragnar back against the stone wall with a powerful blast of magic. You cannot resist your fate, the stranger rasped. The darkness will consume you. Ragnar pulled himself to his feet, muscles screaming in protest. This was a fight he could not win through strength alone. He raised his axe once more in defiance. I choose the light. Closing his eyes, Ragnar recited an old prayer to Odin he had learned as a child. The familiar words brought back memories of home and hearth, innocence not yet lost. He repeated the prayer over and over, shutting out the pale stranger's taunts. Finally, Ragnar felt a presence around him, gentle like a warm summer breeze, yet powerful all the same. The very air in the chapel shimmered with renewed light. Pale stranger shrieked in agony, writhing as if burned. This is your last chance, Dark One, Ragnar intoned. Flee now, or be purified by the light. The pale stranger snarled curses, but retreated into the shadows. Ragnar kept chanting prayers, feeling the light grow ever stronger, banishing the darkness. With a last unearthly howl, the stranger vanished fully. Ragnar sank to his knees in exhaustion. The darkness had receded, for now, but it would never leave him completely. From here, only Ragnar's strength of will could keep it at bay. Stepping outside, Ragnar watched the first rays of dawn break over the snow-capped pines. The coming days would test him greatly, but as long as he held fast to the light in his heart, he would not falter again. Gripping his axe tightly, Ragnar set off down the mountain path towards a new day. Chapter 10, The Compassionate Path. Ragnar trudged along the forest trail, axe slung across his back. It had been weeks since his encounter with the pale stranger, but the memory still haunted him. Though he had resisted the darkness this time, the temptation would always be there. Rounding a bend, Ragnar spotted a young girl kneeling by the roadside, sobbing over a broken wagon wheel. Her parents futilely tried leveraging the heavy cart out of the muddy rut it was lodged in. Ragnar approached cautiously, not wishing to alarm them. "Let me help you with that," he offered gently. The father looked at Ragnar's imposing frame warily. but nodded. With grunts of exertion, the two men dislodged the stubborn wheel while the mother comforted her frightened daughter. Once back on the path, the father clasped Ragnar's arm. "Thank you for your kindness, friend." The little girl even hugged Ragnar before they continued their journey. Ragnar stood watching as the family disappeared down the winding road. A smile tugged at his lips. This was a new path, using his strength to help others. If he focused on light instead of darkness, he could still make a difference in this world. In the next village Ragnar passed through, he volunteered his skills, mending roofs and chopping firewood for the poor and elderly. The work humbled Ragnar, but also brought a sense of peace. By serving humanity, he atoned for the blood spilled in his past. But Ragnar knew the real test still awaited. His dreams remained haunted by visions of the Draugr, beckoning him. One bleak night, when the wind howled through the trees like a wolf pack, Ragnar heard a different call, a distant scream. Rushing towards the sound, Ragnar discovered a farmstead under assault by a band of cutthroats. His blood boiled at the slaughter, but he hesitated. Could he confront such evil without losing himself to darkness? The screams made his decision. Ragnar charged, roaring into battle once more. Panting, Ragnar stared down at the bandit corpses littering the snow. He waited for the bloodlust to grip him again. But it did not come. Ragnar had slain evil, but from a place of light. With that knowledge, he turned and walked away through the swirling snow. Chapter 11. Hunters and Prey. Ragnar sat whittling a chunk of wood into an animal figurine for a sick child he had met in the last village. Focusing on such small acts of kindness helped keep the darkness at bay. But it was always lurking within, seeking any weakness. A snapping branch disrupted Ragnar's work. He glanced up to see a hulking mercenary emerge from the trees, sword drawn. "The bounty on your head will buy me a lot of ale," the man growled. Ragnar slowly sat down, his whittling, and grasped his axe. He had avoided combat since defeating the bandits, but it seemed violence would always track him down. "Leave now, friend. I wish you no harm," the mercenary spat. "The name's Ulf, not friend. And I aim to take you in, willing or not." He charged with a reckless overhead swing. Sighing, Ragnar sidestepped the blow and disarmed Ulf with practiced ease, kicking the sword away. But Ulf produced a dagger from his belt and attacked viciously. Ragnar soon sported several bleeding gashes. As Ulf drove Ragnar back against a gnarled oak, rage kindled within him. The familiar bloodlust, how easy it would be to unleash it and end this fight. Ragnar trembled with the effort of holding back the darkness. Then an idea came to him. Dropping his axe, Ragnar rushed forward and enveloped Ulf in a crushing bear hug. The mercenary struggled violently, slashing with his dagger, but Ragnar held firm. Slowly, the fury drained from Ulf. Ragnar began speaking soothing words until Ulf finally ceased his attack. Releasing the exhausted man, Ragnar retrieved some bandages and dressed Ulf's own wounds. "No more fighting," Ragnar urged, handing Ulf a skin of water. "Go, find a better path." Ulf glared resentfully, but gulped the water down. Gathering up his fallen sword, Ulf turned and stumbled off into the woods. Ragnar watched him go, then exhaled deeply. There were always alternatives to violence for those willing to find them. Stowing his axe, Ragnar returned to his humble camp. He still had much to atone for, many internal battles left to fight. But he would face them as he had Ulf today, with compassion, not brutality. With that silent vow, Ragnar picked up his half-finished wood carving and set calmly back to work. Chapter 12. The Long Road Home. Ragnar walked the empty forest path, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Months had passed since he rejected the darkness and found a new way forward, guided by the light. But he could not shake the growing feeling that his work here was approaching its end. The last village he passed through had no sick to heal or elderly to aid. They only looked upon Ragnar with suspicion and fear once they learned his name. His legend had spread too far. It was time to move on. As Ragnar hiked over rolling hills dotted with newly blossoming trees, his thoughts turned north, back to the Viking settlement he had called home. Perhaps it was time to return, to use his gifts helping rebuild what was lost, if they would have him. Drawing nearer to the village, after many days' travel, Ragnar was struck by the bustle of activity. The Viking settlement had been restored far beyond what he remembered, but the faces of those working the fields and newly built longhouses were not all familiar. Wary eyes followed Ragnar as he made his way to the village square. Before he could call out a greeting, the village chief approached. "Ragnar, the redeemed, you are not welcome here." Ragnar looked stricken. "But this is my home." "Was your home?" the chief corrected sternly. "We know of your crimes and your devilry." He gestured to guards. "Leave now by your own choice, or we shall force you out." Ragnar opened his mouth to argue, but saw the truth on their faces. This was no longer a place he could live in peace. Bowing his head in acceptance, Ragnar turned and walked away without a word. As Ragnar passed the outskirts of town, a voice called out, "Wait." He turned to see a young girl running up to press something into his hand, a carving of a bear he had gifted her months ago. "Don't forget who you really are," she said, eyes brimming with tears. Before Ragnar could respond, she turned and disappeared back into the village. Ragnar studied the small carving and felt the faint glimmer of hope reignite inside. Pocketing the bear, he set off once more. The road stretched endlessly onward, but as long as kindness yet remained in this world, Ragnar would follow it.